All right, let's get rolling because tonight we're going to have a lot of fun. The first 2 hours we're going to talk about one of my favorite things, one of my hobbies, and that is amateur radio. But we're gonna go out a little bit beyond the boundaries of that with our first guest for the first couple hours. Our first guest is Tom Medlin. Tom's been an amateur radio operator for 51 plus years. He holds an extra class license. And he's also an FCC first-class radio telephone, has a first-class radio telephone license with a radar endorsement. He's a senior member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. Only 7% of the 450,000 members ever make it to senior level. He managed FedEx International Telecommunications for 34 years. This is all under the DACE, VOIDA, and radio systems category. He was selected by the Dayton Hamvention last year as the winner of their Special Achievement Award. He's been webcasting ham radio events like the Dayton Hamvention event for 14 plus years. His motto is bringing ham radio to you. His show does prize giveaways to viewers with numbers of over $10,000 in prizes given away every year. His weekly ham radio shortwave show on Tuesday nights. You can tune in if you want to find out more about Tom. You can go to w5kub.com. He's also an international shortwave broadcaster. His show is picked up in the international shortwave broadcast band on 5110 kilohertz. He's communicated with the International Space Station many times. 1 month in particular, he communicated with it 30 times and made friends with astronaut Doug Wheelock. He FedExed Doug some famous Memphis barbecue ribs for his first meal back on Earth. 3 times he's communicated with the International Space Station from his truck heading home from work. Astronaut Doug Wheelock and Tom have become very, very close friends since the incident. Well, I shouldn't say incident, but encounter. Tom was asked to go to Hollywood in October of last year to webcast a special event from the ABC stage of the hit TV show Last Man Standing, featuring Tim Allen, who plays a ham radio operator on the show. Tim had just got his license, and Tom met with Tim and got permission to break the news first on his webcast that he received his license. So without any further delay, let's get him on the phone. Tom, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk and the Fringe Radio Show, my friend.
Hello, Pat. How are you tonight?
We're doing good. How about you?
Well, we're doing good, and summertime's almost here. It's starting to warm up in the Memphis, Tennessee area.
Well, let me ask you, Tom, with all those storms that went through and then, of course, pummeled the East Coast, was that an issue for you by chance with the rainstorms that came through before it turned into snow, or did it turn into snow before it headed east?
Well, Pat, I can't tell you because I was not here. Kathy and I were going through the Panama Canal.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
The day that the snowstorm hit here, but it did hit here, but it didn't usually last but about a day in Memphis.
Gotcha. Well, I know it sure did. It sure wreaked a lot of havoc, and I think there's another storm that is brewing up on the East Coast. But I'm glad summer is. Are you in the Memphis area, Tom?
Yes, I'm in a city called Collierville, Tennessee. We're just a little southeast of Memphis.
Gotcha. Well, sounds good. Well, again, it's an honor to have you on the program tonight. Of course, I read your bio to the listeners. How did you get into this hobby has been such a influential part of my life. I started out years and years ago. I've been a licensed amateur for over 40 years. Of course, my profession is I'm in the information technology business. Being in this hobby pushed me in. I shouldn't say pushed me, but guided me into the hobby. Met so many great friends, and for me, the biggest thing, of course, was being an amateur radio operator, and then having the opportunity to do terrestrial AM radio was kind of the topping on the cake. How did it all start for you? What got you into the hobby?
Well, I got started back in the early 60s. My uncle was a TV repairman. He was probably the only TV repairman in the entire county. Everybody would come to him. So he had a great business, and Probably when I was 4 years old, I was taking parts out of a trash can, and I was taking, wire off transformers, and I was building things at probably 4 or 5. And, that's kind of where I got started, learning my electronics at 5 years old, 6 years old. And, man, I tell you, back then we did a lot of home brewing. That's building our own equipment. And in the back of my uncle's TV station, he probably had 200 junk TV sets, black and white, color, radios. And, boy, I tell you, anytime I needed any kind of parts, you just walk back there with a bucket and a pair of cutters, and you just cut out what parts you need. I mean, it was like having your own electronic supply store.
Sure, sure. Well, and the thing is, one thing that I've mentioned so many times, Tom, and I'd like to get your opinion on it, is I think for so many years the hobby was growing, and of course with the advent of the internet and social media and being able to communicate through social media networks and different things, I kind of felt like the hobby was somewhat dying. But now I tend to see a resurgence in social media and webcasts like your show, and we definitely want to talk about a lot of the different things. But my own feeling is that things are starting to turn around a little bit. They're starting to the hobby is starting to gain a little bit of interest, even though we have so many different forms of technology, which I think pulled people, especially the young people, away. I think today it's starting to swing the other way.
Well, technology has surely changed a lot of things from when you and I started back in the early days. I mean, we didn't even have computers back then, and I mean, everything now is based around computers or the small circuitry. Now you don't fix anything; you throw it away and you get another one. But
right.
The internet is starting to integrate into ham radio, and there's a lot of things now that ham radio uses internet. They're using internet to control remote receivers and transmitters. They're using it to link radio repeaters around the world, where you can talk on a handy-talkie on a repeater in a foreign country through the internet. Now, one of the things interesting about the internet is it gives us all these capabilities, but ham radio is the only form of communications that is guaranteed to work in a case of a major worldwide or even local disaster.
Right.
Your phone lines go out, your phone systems go out, the internet's going to go out. And, I can see that it wouldn't take much to have some type major terrorist hacking threat. It could shut the internet down. You just don't know it. Now, in 2 weeks on our show, we have a regular guest on our show, Riley Hollingsworth, who is a ham, and he's retired from the FCC. Riley was the enforcer of the special counsel to the FCC for many years. And Riley is going to talk specifically on the 16th of this month to our Tuesday night webcast about the Internet and how we need to be careful. The Internet's a great thing to have, but let's don't put all of our eggs in the Internet. We want to keep that other infrastructure ready to go when we need it.
Well, I'd agree with you. I totally agree with you, Tom. It's interesting, but the Internet, I believe, has to some degree taken over such a major part of our life. I was reading an article the other day in one of the trade magazines that I believe in 2 years, the country of Norway is going to do away with paper and coin currency and strictly go to electronic currency. So banks, stores that accept paper money will no longer do that. They're going to strictly go to an electronic form of currency. And it seems like, and not that moving forward with technology isn't a good thing, because I believe it, I think it is, I agree it is, but we're turning so much stuff over. We're stepping out all the time and putting in critical information. Again, as an IT professional, when I work with clients, I try to warn people so much that you really need to be careful what you're doing. There's so many, the Internet, while it is a glorious thing, and it's great from an informational standpoint, it has made businesses successful. It has formed many, many businesses, but there are still a lot of evil elements out there, and there's a lot of people taking advantage of things. Of course, all the hackings and stuff that I think everybody heard about with Target and so many different companies that have been hacked. Again, we tend to put all our bags in one basket in communication, in cell phones. If there is something like, again, here in Taiwan, the 6.4 earthquake that took place the other day, or yesterday, I believe, all communication is out in that area. It's down and done with because we rely so much on technology.
Well, that's true, and it happens across, around the world. There's always those cases where ham radio is the only means of communications, sometimes for several weeks or a month.
Now, with your show, do you get, from time to time, do you get the people from the Aries groups that come in? Do you interview some of those people and talk about their role in disaster areas and in emergency situations?
We do, and occasionally we have people come on that are certified, by the local governments to provide that communications. And we just have a wide range of guests on. We'll do things like on Arduino and all the many things and how it works for ham radio and the things you can do, and a lot of the digital communications systems like D-Star and Fusion that Yaesu has. We just have a very big variety of different type subjects.
Well, and again, people, that's the thing. I think one thing with amateur radio where it has definitely come full circle. I mean, I remember when I was a kid and got into it, the hobby, you'd hear about the local ham radio guy on your block, or the guy that, you saw the house with the huge antennas a few doors away or a few blocks away, or if you had the opportunity to go into somebody's house who was an amateur radio operator. I think for a long time it scared a lot of people away because I think as hams we become accumulators, collectors, but yet accumulators of equipment. And when the average guy comes in and sees a desk or a console full of equipment, right away they figure from a financial standpoint they'll never be able to do this or figure it out or operate it. But you can start small, and there's so many different ways to get into the hobby. For me, when I was 4 years old, Tom, I was a shortwave listener. We had a summer home up in Michigan. We had an old Grundig receiver in our living room, and I thought it was so cool to listen to shortwave broadcasts. And that's kind of how my interest started. But people can start very simple, and you don't need to spend a ton of money to get into the hobby.
Well, I started off in ham radio the same way. I was a shortwave listener. I had a big Zenith radio that stood about 4 feet tall. It had the big round dial in the center. And, boy, that thing really picked up shortwave really well. And I enjoyed listening to, places like Radio Havana, Cuba, Radio Moscow, and all those places. And it was just exciting back then to think that you can have a radio signal that goes that far around the world. And I know what you mean about accumulating radios. My wife was with me this weekend. We did a show in Jackson, Mississippi, and she told me, hey, if you want a new radio, she don't have any problem for me to buy the new radio. She says, but will you get rid of one of your old ones? And hams kind of hang on to that stuff. We don't get rid of too much.
Right. Yeah, because exactly. We probably need to, in technology. With software-defined radios and stuff, and we'll talk about some of that tonight. But it's come so far, but yet there's still, like you said, it's just to have the accumulation of stuff and play with the old stuff. When I started out in the hobby many years ago, kind of the guy that got me into it, he was an engineer, and he had a huge Drake collection of Drake radio equipment. And I was just so impressed when I was young and saw that. And today I've been fortunate enough to pick up some of that vintage equipment. And while it's old, it's still fun to play with. And of course, my reasoning for it, Tom, is, well, it's always going to go up in value and it's fun to tinker with. And of course, if there's ever an EMP, my more modern gear is probably going to get wiped out. But, a bunch of old glowing tubes isn't affected by much of that. And there really is some truth to that.
Well, and that's absolutely correct. And those old radios still work. They still sound good. And I wish I'd had some of the old radios that I got rid of when I started off at 16, 17, 18 in the hobby. I look back at some of those now and think, well, it'd be really nice to have that radio just to look back and think about the good old times,
Oh, I totally agree. And again, for our listeners that are listening tonight, if you want to, again, one of the great things about the internet is there are actually websites out there. I probably need to put some links in Facebook or on our website. But if you have a desire to listen, there are online radio stations. There are online shortwave stations. And there are, like, as Tom mentioned, the remote bases and the remote stations where you're actually able to take advantage of some pretty sophisticated high-end equipment and broadcast right through a headset through your computer. It's totally legal if you have the license, of course. But there's a lot of stuff out there that people can sample and test drive right on the internet to see if it's something that interests them.
Yeah, and Pat, one of the things that I'd like to mention again here to people, we're going to talk about some of the things we do, like our streaming ham radio site, and the motto is bringing ham radio to you. And people that want to get that are interested in getting your ham license, boy, it's much easier now than it used to be. You don't have to know code, and you get the question pool to study. But what we try to do is our webcast is devoted to people, particularly that can't make ham radio events. For instance, the Dayton Ham Convention is probably one of the world's largest ham radio conventions. And, when I was 16 years old, living in Arkansas in a little town of less than 1,000 people, there was no way I could go to the Dayton Ham Convention. That was 500 or 600 miles away. I didn't have the money. I didn't have the means to go. So what our show does, it tries to bring to those people that maybe don't have the money, maybe they're too young to travel, maybe they're too old to travel, they're sick, it's too far. So we bring all that to our viewers out there on W5KUB.com and give them that ham radio experience.
Right.
And when I say give them that experience, they not only feel like they're at that ham fest, but we have a chat room, and anybody logged in the chat room, we have a program that will randomly pick names, and we'll pick names and give people some very nice prizes from transceivers, E-Star equipment, antenna tuners, just anything. And as you mentioned opening the show, we do about $10,000 per year in prizes. So these people actually feel like they are they're at a ham fest.
Well, and it's true because they're one thing I've noticed over the years. I'm from Chicago, Tom. That's where I came here to Salt Lake City some 20 years ago for my job. But I noticed that a lot of the ham radio conventions and stuff, they've kind of thinned out a little bit. Again, I think that was probably because for some time, ham radio, I felt, being in the hobby as long as I have, it did go through a downswing, and now it's starting to come up again. One thing that I think is great is this year in April in Las Vegas is going to be a fairly big ham fest. Believe it or not, at one time, I think it was at the Sahara Hotel, I never had the opportunity to go there, but years ago, there was a ham fest that some said almost rivaled the Dayton Ham Convention in Las Vegas in the wintertime, and that went away. And now in April, I think it's the last weekend of April, if I'm not mistaken, I'd have to take a look, there's going to be a fairly large convention in Las Vegas. And you know, and again, the hobby is starting to kind of regenerate itself. But like you said, a lot of people can't afford to go. Young people want to experience it. And looking at your videos, which again, people can go to your website, and then all your stuff gets archived on YouTube. It allows people to get the feel of things and listen to the interviews and kind of get a sense of, kind of, like you said, kind of a sense of being there.
Yeah, it really does. And, you know, our guests we've got some of the best experts in the field. We've got a segment that we do about antennas by a chief engineer of a company that builds antennas. And people can actually ask questions right during the show, either through the chat room or by the telephone. Mm-hmm. And we answer their questions. And we tell them, you know, maybe some suggestions of the best way to get up an antenna. And, you know, there's people living in these homeowner associations that supposedly can't put an antenna up, but you can still do it. You can still get one up.
Oh, yeah.
You know, when I moved to this location about 12 years ago or so, I did not put my tower. You were talking about all the equipment and the antennas and everything, but I did not put my tower and beams back up. I chose the last 10 years to just use wire antennas between trees, between some high tree limbs and so forth. And, you know, they're pretty much invisible. I bet you my neighbors don't see it. And in fact, I can go out in the yard and look up in the trees, and most of the time I don't even see them because they blend in with all the trees, you know. But, you know, I've talked to probably over 100 countries on those wires, and I can do just about as good a job using wires for antenna as I could with a big tower and a big beam.
Exactly. And you know, and I think that's a good point you brought it up, Tom, because again, people I think sometimes get a little bit intimidated when they see that big council of radios and that big antenna tower. And you've been a ham a long time, and you could relate. There's some people that, let's be honest, with any hobby, there's a little bit of ego there. You know, mine's bigger than yours. I've got more antennas up, or I've got more metal in the air. And I'm on a small postage stamp lot. I've got a couple. I do have a hex beam up, and I want to thank Roger at NA4RR at hexbeam.com for helping us with that antenna. It's been an amazing antenna for a small area. My other house, which I sold a few years ago, I had a 60-foot tower up, and I had a big log periodic, and I was amazed how I was a little leery, but again, because of the restrictions of where I'm at, because of the size of the lot, I have this hex beam up, which is essentially an antenna made of wire, is all it is. But as you mentioned, it's amazing that you can talk to people around the world on a 40 or 50 or 100-foot piece of wire hanging from a tree with a cable going to it. It absolutely blows me away. You don't have to have that huge setup and that huge investment.
Well, that hex beam is a very nice antenna. It's I think it's a 2-element,
right,
multi-band, and you know it doesn't take the same amount of space as say a dipole would, because it's kind of folded, you know, on that hex beam, and it does a great job. And there are a lot of antennas of a person. There are so many antennas. The nice thing about ham radio is you don't even have to go out and buy an antenna. Experiment with your antennas. Build your antennas. All it takes is a wire and some coax.
Right.
And you just cut it certain lengths. You put it different configurations and try it. And, you know, my advice to people is just put something up and try it. And you know what? It'll work.
Right. Yeah.
And unless you've got a big beam or something next to it and a switch where you can flip back and forth and compare it, you may not even know the difference.
Exactly. No, I know. There, again, you don't have to have, and even apartment dwellers. I have a good friend of mine that just got his license recently, and he lives on the 3rd floor of an apartment building. And while he hasn't transmitted yet, he's a little bit nervous. I'm trying to coax him into doing it because he's got a beautiful radio he picked up for himself. He picked up one of the new Yaesu 991s. He picked up a gorgeous radio, but he's hanging wire in his apartment. Luckily, he's a single guy, so he doesn't have to deal with the wife yelling or screaming because there's stuff hanging all over. but he's able to receive things, and I know that the actual antenna will work just as well. We have some local amateur radio operators here in our area. One ham friend of mine, he's blind. He's legally blind. Lives in an apartment complex, and he has the ham community, of course, pulled together, helped him out, put up some antennas in his apartment. Like you said, he's talking to people all over the world with just a piece of wire, some stuff on his railing, nothing very inconspicuous, doesn't detract, and he's just having a ball. And even the challenge of I think it's kind of fun, Tom, to put up an antenna, make a contact, and see that it works. That's part of the hobby, not only talking to somebody else on the other side of the world, but just seeing it work and making it work.
Yeah, I'm going to get real crude here and give our audience here a description of a very crude antenna, but it works. For instance, you could find you a piece of aluminum pipe or conduit, and by the book, it needs to be a certain length or a certain frequency that you're going to operate. But hey, for an insulator, use a Coke bottle. Set that Coke bottle on the ground and set that pipe on top of it. I mean, basically, that's all it takes to make an antenna that works. You don't have to go out and spend hundreds or thousands of dollars on an antenna system.
Exactly. Well, even for shortwave, I had actually had a listener write into the show. We had Carol Perry on, and we'll talk a little bit about her a little later on. But we had her on the show, and this gentleman really got intrigued with amateur radio. He had an old shortwave receiver, and he lived in an apartment, and he called me up. He actually sent me an email. I called him and talked to him, and he said, I really want to get into this, and I really want to start with the receiving and the shortwave stuff. He said, I don't have a lot of room. He said, I'm actually sharing an apartment with my brother, and, I can't put wires all over. And what he did is he just went out and bought himself a broomstick, cut it to 6 feet, and just took wire and coiled it around the broomstick, wrapped it with some masking tape, set it in the corner, hooked it up to the receiver. And he emailed me about a week later, and he said, I can't believe this. I'm hearing Radio Havana. I'm hearing stations from, Europe. I can't believe what I'm hearing on this broomstick with wire around it. So like you say, it doesn't take a whole lot to make it work.
Yeah, we've been talking mostly about HF or high frequency, and there's other aspects to ham radio, for instance, the VHF, UHF bands. And a lot of people get their first license, what they call the tech license, which has some restrictions as far as the frequency bands you can operate. But with a tech license, I mean, you can get a very inexpensive handy talkie now, a walkie-talkie. And on the ham radio bands, you can buy those for $40 now.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio. Our guest tonight is Tom Medlin. He's an amateur radio operator, and he runs a great website. He does a weekly web show. You can go to his website at www.w5kub.com and learn about this great hobby. Again, Tom, I want to thank you for spending some time and giving up your Saturday night to be with us.
Well, we've enjoyed being with you tonight, and let me just say that site, w5kub.com, is there 24 hours a day. We do have a live show on Tuesday nights with live guests, and that is on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. Central Time. 8 p.m. Central Time. It usually lasts upwards of 2 hours with guests from around the world, and I think people will really enjoy it if they're interested in the hobby. So, and when we're not live, you can also go to our YouTube channel, just W5KUB on YouTube, and you can pull up all the past shows because, as Pat mentioned, all of our shows are archived within about an hour of the live show, and you can watch any of our shows that we've had previously. We've been doing the weekly show about 1 year now. We've been webcasting live ham radio events like Ham Fest and Field Day and other special events for about 14 years. But we are we have just completed this month 1 year on our weekly ham radio webcast on W5KB.com.
Wow. Well, it's, again, I enjoyed the show, and I came across it, and I've watched it several times. Tom, before we took a break, we talked about handhelds, VHF and UHF stuff. You want to pick up with that again? Again, if a person doesn't want to put up wire antennas or something, you started to talk about that. Why don't you go ahead and pick up with that?
Sure. I was mentioning that on the market now, you can get a VHF, UHF handy-talkie, and that's what we call a walkie-talkie, for probably in the $40 range. That's probably the low end, but you can get a new one for $40. That's some of these Chinese radios that are starting to hit the market. But, you know, in addition to the HF radio that we've been talking about earlier with these long wire antennas and so forth, ham radio has many different facets of things that we do, and one of them is satellite operation. We actually have satellites going around the Earth on the ham radio frequencies, and with one of these little cheap VHF, UHF handy-talkies, you can actually make contacts with other hams through a satellite when it goes over.
Right.
And that's really an exciting aspect of ham radio. Now, it kind of what goes along with that is the space station. Think of the space station kind of as a satellite that goes around. It's in orbit, too. And almost every mission on the space station, there are usually one or two ham radio operators. We have ham radio gear on the International Space Station, and they make contacts with hams down here on the ground. And it is really exciting to be able to say, you know, I talk to the International Space Station. And as you mentioned, you know, let me tell you about my experience working the space station.
Sure.
I tried for a long time, and I hear it talking to people. There's hundreds of thousands of people trying to work it, you know, so you're all competing. And I tried for 9 months or a year, and then I was having a hard time making contact. And then just something happened. I didn't make any changes. Something happened. And then in the month of October, I made 30 contacts with the International Space Station.
Wow.
And as you mentioned, when I was driving home from work, if the space station was coming over, I would turn the mobile rig on in the truck, and I talked to Doug Wheelock in the space station 3 times while I was driving home in the truck. So it doesn't take any special radios. It doesn't take any special antennas. It doesn't take any power. And you can do that with the license that most people start off with, called the technician license.
And the technician license, again, that's the lowest class available now. I know things from when we started years ago, Tom, it's really changed without a doubt. But again, there's no more code requirements, so you don't need to learn Morse code. Although I believe that while there are, you know, the FCC dropped that requirement, it's still not a bad thing to learn by any means. It's another form of communication. And there are many hams that still use Morse code, or we call it CW. But with the technician class license, like you said, I believe, is it 25 or 50 questions? Very, very simple. And you can get your technician class, and you can start using these handheld radios.
Yeah, it's easy to get your license now. And we have volunteer examiners that set up testing sessions in your area. You go take the test there. Back when we took our test, Pat, you probably did the same as me. I had to go to the FCC. They came to Memphis, Tennessee, only 4 times a year. Mm-hmm. And if you fail the test there, you know, you could come back 4 months later.
Right.
But you don't have that problem anymore. It's the tests are given locally by volunteer examiners, and there's nothing to keep you from taking the test again the next day.
Yeah, here in Salt Lake City, we have the Utah Amateur Radio Club is the largest club in the city, in the valley. There's several others, but they provide, I believe there's test sessions between here in Utah, up in northern Utah, between the North Valley, the Salt Lake Valley, and down in Utah County. Believe it or not, I think there's testing done virtually almost every weekend. So if somebody wants info, email us, or again, just go to, for here in Utah, it's the Utah Amateur Radio Club, UARC, and There's it's an all volunteer organization, and they give the tests. I think there's a slight FCC fee. I think, is it $10 or something, Tom, just for the paperwork, but very inexpensive. And again, that first class of license, the technician class, very obtainable by anybody. And again, you can get on the air right away. You don't need a license to listen, though. Like I tell people, if you want to listen through online, or if you want to buy a shortwave receiver, or even if you go to, I had one gentleman email a couple weeks ago. He said, I went to a local pawn shop and saw a radio, and I picked it up for a good deal. And I'll just throw out there again, if you don't have a license, don't transmit. If you have a, if you don't know, don't, because it is a federal offense to do that. Learn the ropes, get the license, do it the right way, but there's nothing illegal about receiving.
That's right, and there are so many different modes that you can operate on ham radio. You can operate, AM, like the station that you're on right now, on AM 630. You can operate AM. You can operate sideband. Teletype, radio teletype, where you're typing to other people. There's various digital modes. You can operate amateur TV. You can actually put an amateur TV station on, and another ham, across town can tune you in, and you guys can have TV back and forth. There's moon bounce. We just had a show a few weeks ago on sending a ham radio signal from the Earth to the moon and back and making contact. And of course, I mentioned satellites, and there are so many different things. I probably only mentioned about half of them, but you can always find something to do.
Well, that's one thing about the hobby that really intrigues me, is everybody has something favorite that they like to do. For me, something that I fell in love with years and years ago is the 6-meter amateur radio band. I love 6 meters. I love the digital stuff. I mean, there's such a variety of things you can do. And the radios of today, while they are, of course, Tom, you mentioned the handhelds for $30, $40, $50. Then, of course, you get into these more advanced radios. And, yeah, they can go up into the thousands of dollars price range. But they're, first of all, they're built so well, and they offer so much. And it's like anything. It's like buying a luxury car. Of course, it's always more fun to drive a Cadillac maybe than it is to drive a basic Chevy. But at the end of the day, you still get to the same place. But the bells and whistles are fun. And they sometimes, again, I think some of it's a little bit ego. But there's just so much you can do. We couldn't even scratch the surface here in a couple hours to talk about all the stuff that's out there. A field day, maybe you could talk a little bit about that, where amateurs go out in the field and operate portably.
Sure. We've done several field days on our webcast, and it's just where hams or ham clubs get together, and they go out in a field, go out in a park or somewhere. They'll set up communications, and basically it's to test the emergency capabilities that they have. They'll take a generator out there, they'll put an antenna up in a tree, they'll set their radio up, and during field day they make contacts with other people that are working at an event all around the country, and it's kind of like a contest to see who can make the most contacts, using emergency power in those situations. And hey, you got to understand it. You're operating field day under some severe conditions many times in a disaster, storms and tornadoes and things like that. But this last year, we went down to Mississippi and webcast the radio club down in Mississippi. And I think that morning we got 7 inches of rain. And when I got there, the place was just about to float away. They were all up on picnic tables trying to stay out of the water. Lightning was hitting everywhere, so they had everything turned off, and they were just trying to survive. But that's the kind of real life things that you might go through in a real disaster.
Well, and the other thing I think that it definitely where it really comes in is, look here in Taiwan. Look at the earthquake that hit the other day, or when Katrina hit. or again, any sort of a major disaster, a lot of the local clubs, the Aries groups, or better known as the Amateur Radio, Amateur Radio Emergency Services, is a group of hams that dedicate time, and as Tom said, they go through practice sessions to set up. Of course, in an emergency situation, just like a triage situation, people that find themselves in a natural disaster of some sort, they're pretty scared. They're pretty panicked. I think a lot of people don't realize that, when our way of life radically changes, it's one thing, and I think everybody will agree, in a thunderstorm when the power goes out, it's kind of an inconvenience. But imagine being in a situation, whether it's an earthquake, a hurricane, a flood, whatever it may be, tornado. Now your house is gone, everything's destroyed, power coming back on is something that's not going to be in sight for a long, long time. You tend to get panic-stricken. And of course, the emergency services kick in, but there's only so many police officers, firemen, and medics in different areas. But these Aries group, they step up, they don't get paid for it, and they go into these areas and they help with simple things just to comfort people, just to provide emergency communication so that the professionals, the firefighters, what have you, can help people out. I mean, it's an invaluable service. Or in hurricanes, on the HF band, there's different frequencies where they have hurricane nets. When communications to islands and other countries gets knocked out, they provide the communication in and out when the phone service isn't there.
Yeah, during Katrina, back when that hurricane just devastated the New Orleans area, Memphis is about 300 miles north of New Orleans, and many people, when they fled New Orleans, they came up and settled in many cities: Jackson, Mississippi, Memphis. They just went everywhere, anywhere they could find a hotel, because so many people left New Orleans. But I had a family contact me during that. They called me. They saw I was a ham radio operator, called me and said, we have a daughter that's in New Orleans, and we haven't heard from her. We think she's okay, but there's no communications at all down there. So I was able to contact other hams in New Orleans by ham radio and arrange for some communications or contact, and put this family together with their daughter down in somewhere in Mississippi. It wasn't quite in New Orleans, but the daughter actually worked at a TV station, mm-hmm. and she was safe. She was safe, and everybody had locked themselves in the TV station, and of course they had food and water, but that's where they were, and of course they had no communications, and I was able to contact by ham radio and make contact there at that TV station and put this family in touch with their daughter. And then, of course, that made them feel much better knowing that that each part of the family was still safe.
Well, and again, that's the thing that hams do. I mean, that's the thing that we all do, even during war. During wartime, current wartime. Again, allowing families to, years back before the internet and cell phones and all that, allowing families to talk to their sons and daughters in the military through what they called phone patches. They could somebody could call a ham radio operator, make the connection. He would talk to the person on the other side of the world, and brought families together. Like you said, in a crisis situation. That's the biggest thing is people, they want to be, they want to know their loved ones are safe and their family is safe. And that's a service that's invaluable. And I think anybody who's in the hobby, while he may or she may enjoy all these other things, which make it a lot of fun and interesting, we're all willing to step up. Tom, I've got to take an NBC News break here in a little bit. Let you get a sip of something to drink. Can we keep you around for another go-around?
Sure, I'll be here.
All right, our guest tonight is Tom Medlin. It's an honor to have him on the show. His program is on Tuesday evenings. What time is that, Tom? Is it 7 p.m. Eastern?
It's 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern.
Okay. And the website is www.w5kub.com. You can chat just like we do here on this show, or call in if you've got questions, or email in, and the group will be glad to take care of you.